At first glance, it was harmless. A boy. An umbrella. A summer street frozen in 1910. Nothing about the photograph suggested danger. No blood. No shadows shaped like hands. No distorted faces. It looked like the kind of image families once framed and placed on mantels, proof that a childhood had existed, even briefly. But the photograph was never meant to be remembered. It survived by accident, and when it was finally enlarged, something in it refused to stay quiet. The photograph surfaced during the cataloging of a private estate in New England, the kind of estate that had not been lived in for decades. Dust lay thick enough on the floor to preserve footprints. The air carried the faint, sour smell of damp paper and rotting wood. Nothing inside the house suggested wealth or fame, just the slow abandonment of a life that had ended without witnesses. Inside a locked cedar chest, beneath yellowed letters and a child's shoe, the photograph was found wrapped in cloth, not framed, not labeled. Hidden, the image showed a boy no older than 8, standing alone on what appeared to be a residential street. Wooden houses behind him. Dirt road beneath his feet. He wore a buttoned coat despite the brightness of the day. In his right hand, he held an umbrella, closed, its tip resting on the ground. The boy was smiling, not wide, not forced, soft, polite, the kind of smile children were taught to give when adults told them to stand still. On the back of the photograph, written in fading ink, were only 3 words. Do not enlarge. That warning was ignored. Early photographs were unforgiving. Exposure times were long. Subjects had to remain motionless. Children struggled the most. Any movement turned them into blurs, ghosts smeared across the frame. Yet the boy was perfectly sharp, sharper than the houses, sharper than the road, sharper than the sky behind him. That alone raised questions. But curiosity is never satisfied by one wrong detail. The photograph was scanned, cleaned, adjusted, and then zoomed. At first, nothing changed. The boy's face held its gentle smile. His hair was neatly combed. His eyes, dark, reflective, looked slightly to the side of the camera, as if focused on someone standing just beyond the photographer. Then, the zoom passed the boy's hands and reached the umbrella. The handle was wrong. It was not curved like umbrellas of the period. It was straight, thick, wrapped in what looked like worn leather, and it was being held too tightly. The boy's knuckles were pale. His fingers pressed deep, unnaturally deep into the material, deep enough that the leather seemed to bend inward as though soft, as though it wasn't leather at all. Further zoom revealed something worse. The umbrella cast a shadow, but the shadow did not match the object. It stretched longer than it should have, wider, and at its edge, where shadows usually fade, there was definition. Too much definition. The shadow ended in something like fingers. The archivist working on the scan reported a sudden headache. Nothing dramatic. Just pressure behind the eyes. She finished the scan, saved the file, and shut down her workstation early. That night, she dreamed of rain, not falling, waiting. The photograph gained attention quietly, passed between specialists who believed themselves immune to superstition. They spoke of lens distortion, exposure anomalies, damaged emulsion. They spoke too long. Because the longer the image was studied, the more consistent the reports became. The boy's smile appeared different after extended viewing. Not wider, closer. The eyes seemed to follow changes in angle. And the umbrella never stayed the same shape twice. Historical records were searched. No missing child matched the image exactly. No death certificate. No census listing that placed a boy of that description on that street in 1910. But a local newspaper, dated August of that year, mentioned something odd. A brief article. 3 sentences. A sudden storm passed through the Eastern District yesterday afternoon. Witnesses described the rain as localized. 1 child was reported missing. Authorities found no body, no name, no follow-up. The photograph was enlarged again. That was when they saw it. Behind the boy. Between the houses. Just past the edge of focus. Something stood in the doorway of one of the homes. Tall. Too tall. And holding something long and narrow. Something that reflected light the same way the umbrella did. The boy was not alone when the photograph was taken. He was being watched, and whatever stood behind him was not facing the camera. It was facing him. The archivist resigned 2 days later. Before leaving, she deleted every copy of the image she could access, except one. The original scan was left open on her screen, zoomed into the boy's face. The final activity log on her computer recorded a single action repeated dozens of times in the minutes before shutdown. Zoom in. Zoom in. Zoom in, as if she were trying to see something closer, or something was asking her to. This photograph was not sweet. It was not innocent. It was a moment preserved too clearly for something that should not have remained still. And once the image was seen clearly enough, it began to look back. The problem with the photograph was not what it showed. It was what it allowed. Once the image had been enlarged beyond its original scale, something about it stopped behaving like a photograph. Files copied from the scan showed small inconsistencies, pixels shifting where no compression artifact should exist. Shadows changed shape between identical exports. The umbrella's tip appeared closer to the ground in one version, slightly lifted in another. No edits had been made. The image was simply refusing to settle. The estate where the photograph was found belonged to a family long erased from local memory. Their name appeared rarely in records, and when it did, it was always attached to property transfers, tax liens, or notices of absence. No births, no marriages, and, curiously, no recorded deaths inside the household. The house itself had been abandoned abruptly sometime after 1910. Furniture remained. Dishes sat cracked in cabinets. A child's coat hung by the door, small, dark, and stiff with age. But there were no photographs on the walls, except nail marks. A second archivist took over the research. He was younger, confident, the kind of person who believed fear was a relic of ignorance. He dismissed the early reports as coincidence and stress. He insisted the photograph be analyzed like any other artifact. That was his first mistake. His second was adjusting the contrast. The street behind the boy brightened. Details emerged. Wooden slats. A fence line. A narrow alley between two buildings that had not been visible before. And in that alley, something stood far back in the darkness. Not fully shaped, but present. Early photography captured movement poorly. Anything that moved during exposure blurred. But the figure in the alley was not blurred. It was incomplete. As if only part of it had entered the frame, or as if the rest had chosen not to. The archivist leaned closer to the screen. That was when he noticed the umbrella again. The handle was not wood. It was bone, not carved. Worn. Umbrellas in 1910 were expensive. Decorative. Fashion items. This one lacked ornamentation entirely. Its surface showed uneven texture, faint lines like growth rings, interrupted by darker patches that absorbed light. It was not an umbrella meant to block rain. It was something repurposed. The boy's grip around it made sense now. He wasn't holding it gently. He was anchoring himself. The archivist cross-referenced weather records. August 1910 did, in fact, record a storm. But not a normal one. Reports described rain falling on a single neighborhood while surrounding areas remained dry. Thunder heard without lightning. Clouds forming too low, too fast. One witness claimed the rain, quote, rose from the ground. Another wrote that it stood still. The photograph was examined again. Rain was visible now, faint streaks across the image that had previously blended into grain. But they did not fall vertically. They curved inward, toward the boy. That night the archivist woke to the sound of dripping. Not from the ceiling, from his hallway. The floor was dry, but the sound continued, steady and patient, as though something wet were standing just out of sight. He did not investigate. He remained still until morning. By the third day, the image had changed again. No new elements had appeared. Instead, something had shifted position. The shadow cast by the umbrella had moved closer to the boy's feet, and the thing in the alley now appeared closer to the edge of the frame. Not larger, closer. The archivist printed the photograph. Paper did not behave like digital files. If the image was changing, he wanted proof. The printer jammed. When he opened it, the page was half fed, the boy's face fully printed while the rest of the image remained blank. Except for one thing. A dark shape bled outward from the umbrella's shadow, soaking into the paper fibers. The shape looked like a footprint. The archivist did not return to work the following day. His apartment was found locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. He was discovered standing in his bathroom, fully dressed, holding nothing, but his hands were positioned as if gripping something long and narrow. His fingers were stiff, curled, indented, as though they had been holding that shape for a very long time. The photograph was sealed, labeled hazardous, restricted from further study. But restrictions do not erase curiosity, and curiosity, once exposed, does not forget. Years later, the image resurfaced online. A low-resolution scan posted anonymously to a forum dedicated to historical anomalies. No context, no warning, just the image. Within hours, users began noticing the same things. The umbrella, the shadow, the figure in the background. Someone commented that the boy looked relieved. Someone else replied that he looked resigned. A third user pointed out something new. The boy's feet. They were not touching the ground. The thread was deleted, but screenshots remain. And once something has been seen, it does not return to being unseen. The photograph was not a record of a moment. It was a record of a handover, A child taught to stand still long enough for something else to finish arriving, and the umbrella was never meant to protect him from the rain. It was there to mark him. The storm of 1910 did not pass. It learned where to stop. By the time the photograph reached the public, it was already incomplete. Not damaged, emptied. Every official archive that once held a copy now listed it as misfiled, lost, or never received. Records contradicted each other. Accession numbers looped back on themselves. One ledger referenced a withdrawal dated 5 years before the photograph was taken. It was as if the image had begun rewriting its own paper trail. The online copy should not have mattered. Low resolution, heavily compressed. A shadow of a shadow. But compression does not erase structure, and structure was exactly what the image carried too well. People who downloaded it noticed the same thing within hours. The longer the file stayed open, the slower their systems responded. Not crashing. Not freezing. Hesitating. As if processing something unnecessary. A graduate student studying early American photography downloaded the image out of academic curiosity. He zoomed in once. Then again. Then adjusted the levels to isolate the shadows. That was when he noticed the rain had depth, not streaks, threads, each one curved slightly, bending inward toward the umbrella tip. And where the rain converged, the darkness beneath the umbrella was not solid. It was layered, like overlapping silhouettes occupying the same space. The student felt a sudden pressure in his chest, not pain, not fear. Instruction, the irrational certainty that he should stand up. He did, and remained there for several minutes, staring at the screen, until his roommate asked what he was doing. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm in the way." That sentence appeared again later. In a police report. In a hospital intake form. In a handwritten note left beside an unplugged monitor. Always the same phrasing. The boy in the photograph began to change. Not dramatically, subtly. His posture straightened further. His smile softened into something almost apologetic. And the umbrella, once clearly an object, started to lose definition at its edges. As if it were becoming less necessary. Researchers traced the location of the photograph to a street that no longer existed. The houses had been demolished decades earlier. The land repurposed, paved, forgotten. But an older map showed something strange. The street had been renamed twice within 10 years, and before it had a name at all, it was marked only with a symbol. A simple vertical line crossed by 3 shorter ones, like rain striking ground. Local folklore surfaced reluctantly. Stories told only when prompted, always followed by dismissal or laughter that came too late. An old belief, a thing about storms that did not move, rain that fell in one place and nowhere else, and children who learned too quickly how to be quiet. The umbrella was not protection, it was permission. One surviving diary from the period mentioned a boy who stood through the rain without blinking. The entry described adults watching from windows, unsure why none of them went outside. The writer noted something else. The rain did not touch the boy's shoulders. It stopped inches above him, as if waiting for something to finish forming. The photograph captured that pause, that exact interval between arrival and completion, and those who looked too closely began to feel it, the pause, the expectation. A pattern emerged. People who merely glanced at the image felt uneasy. People who studied it felt watched. People who zoomed in too far felt compelled to remain still, and those who adjusted the image to clarify the umbrella. They reported rain, even in dry rooms, even indoors. One man described standing beneath a streetlight at night while it rained everywhere except directly above him. He said the darkness above felt heavier than clouds, as if something were holding its breath. The boy's eyes, when examined frame by frame, reflected something not present in the street. A vertical shape, tall, interrupted by movement around it, like rain sliding off a surface that could not be seen. The photograph was removed again, hard drives wiped, servers scrubbed, but this time, something remained. A residue. Screens where the image had been displayed showed faint afterimages, subtle distortions in brightness that did not fade. People described them as outlines, not of the boy, of what had been waiting above him. The storm was not an event. It was a process, and the boy had been the first successful still point. The umbrella finally disappeared from the image, not removed, replaced. Where it once stood was now a darker absence, shaped like something that no longer needed to be held. And the boy's hands, they were empty, but still gripping. The disappearance of the umbrella should have ended the phenomenon. Instead, it accelerated it. The image no longer needed an object to anchor attention. Whatever the umbrella had once represented, permission, containment, instruction, had already been learned. The boy had learned it, and now others were beginning to. Attempts to reconstruct the original photograph using period-accurate equipment failed. Every recreation came out wrong. Exposure times matched. Lenses matched. Even lighting conditions were carefully duplicated. But something was always missing. Or worse, something extra appeared. One reproduction developed a faint vertical distortion directly above where the boy would have stood. Another showed rain-like streaks forming despite the absence of moisture. A third cracked during development, the fracture pattern bending inward instead of outward, as if the image were rejecting imitation. The land itself began to show anomalies. Workers repaving the area reported sudden cold pockets during clear weather. Tools left standing upright would fall over without explanation, except one. A long, narrow metal rod used for measuring ground depth remained standing for hours, untouched by wind or vibration. No one moved it. No one wanted to. A previously overlooked document surfaced in a private collection, a letter written by a local physician in late 1910. The handwriting was neat. The tone clinical. Until the final paragraph, the child did not die during the storm. He ceased responding before the rain ended. I am uncertain when he stopped being alone. The letter ended without a signature. By now, the photograph no longer needed to be viewed directly. People described dreams of standing beneath something tall and patient. They felt rain approach but never arrive. They were instructed, without words, to remain still. Some woke standing. Others did not wake at all. The boy's name, long absent from records, finally appeared. Elliot Marrow, age 8. Listed once, never again. Elliot had been known for standing quietly. Teachers praised his discipline. Neighbors described him as well-mannered. His parents were rarely seen. Their house faced the street, but kept its curtains drawn even during daylight. The storm occurred on a Sunday. No church bells rang that day. Witnesses later said the sound was swallowed. The photograph, in its latest known state, showed no rain, no umbrella, no shadow, only the boy, standing. And behind him, no longer hidden by blur or darkness, stood the shape that had once been incomplete. It was not monstrous. It was not dramatic. It was simply there, tall enough that its top extended beyond the frame, narrow enough to fit between houses. Its surface did not reflect light. It redirected it, and where its face should have been was nothing that the eye could hold on to. People who saw this version did not scream. They stopped, mid-breath, mid-step, mid-thought. Some remained that way until discovered. Others were never found. The storm of 1910 had been a test. Elliot had passed. The photograph was proof. And proof, once observed, creates expectation. The phenomenon spread not through images, but through awareness, through the understanding that stillness could invite something closer. That patience was not passive. That standing long enough, quietly enough, could allow a presence to finish arriving. The boy had been the first. But first does not mean only. By the time authorities realized the pattern, it was already embedded. Not in archives, not in photographs, but in behavior. People were learning without being taught. It began with small, harmless pauses. A man standing too long at a crosswalk after the light turned green. A woman freezing mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, posture perfect. Children stopping in the middle of play, umbrellas forgotten in their hands even when the sky was clear. Doctors called it dissociation. Psychologists blamed stress. Climatologists denied any connection to weather. None of them understood the rule. You did not need rain. You only needed to wait correctly. Surveillance footage captured the change better than photographs ever could. In one clip, a subway platform during rush hour, hundreds of people moving in controlled chaos. At the far end of the frame, a single figure stands motionless near a pillar. Minutes pass. Commuters flow around him. No one bumps into him. No one acknowledges him. It is as if space itself has adjusted. When the footage is enhanced, something tall appears briefly behind the pillar. Too narrow, too vertical, gone in the next frame. The man never moves again. Researchers reviewing the footage experienced symptoms even without seeing the image directly. One analyst reported feeling, quote, aligned. Another wrote only one sentence before resigning. It's easier when you don't resist the stillness. The boy, Elliot, was no longer visible in the image. Not erased. Completed. The space he once occupied now felt cleared. Prepared. The umbrella reappeared in reports worldwide. Not always as an object. Sometimes as a sensation, pressure above the head, the certainty of shelter where none existed. People described holding something long and narrow in their dreams. They woke with aching hands. Indented palms, meteorological instruments began recording impossible readings. Rain detected without clouds. Humidity spikes in sealed rooms. Localized pressure drops shaped like columns. The storms did not move. They waited. A classified report referenced a theory abandoned almost immediately. The idea that stillness itself could act as a conduit. that when a body remained unmoving long enough, it ceased to interrupt something passing through space. The boy in 1910 had not been chosen. He had been suitable. The photograph's final known copy was destroyed in a controlled burn. Observers reported the flames bending inward, avoiding a narrow vertical strip at the center of the image. That section did not burn. It simply darkened. In the weeks that followed, disappearances increased. Not sudden. Not violent. People were found standing. In fields. In hallways. On rooftops. Always dry. Always upright. Always facing slightly upward. No signs of struggle. No cause of death. Just a subtle compression in the air around them, as though something tall had recently occupied the same space. The storms now came without warning. A single block drenched while the rest of the city remained dry. Rain falling upward. Umbrellas opening on their own. Children were told to keep moving, but children learn faster than adults. They notice when standing still makes the world quiet. Somewhere, something had finished arriving, and it was no longer satisfied with one place. There was no announcement when it finally happened. No sirens. No warnings. No final message broadcast to prepare anyone, because preparation was never required. Only compliance. The storms no longer appeared as weather. They appeared as pauses. Entire streets would fall quiet for a fraction of a second too long. Wind would stop mid-motion. Leaves would hang in the air as if undecided. Conversations would thin, stretch, then fail. And somewhere in that silence, the vertical pressure would return. Witnesses described the same sensation across different cities, different countries, different climates, a feeling of something standing behind reality, not entering, not emerging, waiting for space to open. The first mass incident occurred in a shopping arcade at midday. Cameras showed normal movement until one child stopped walking, just stopped. Hands at his sides, head slightly tilted upward. Within seconds, 3 adults near him slowed. Then more. Shoppers adjusted their posture unconsciously, feet aligning, shoulders squaring. No one panicked. No one screamed, because panic requires motion, and motion was becoming unnecessary. When emergency services arrived, they found 47 people standing in place. Alive, breathing, but no longer responding. Rain fell only inside the building, not from the ceiling, from above the people, as if something tall were passing through them slowly. Medical scans revealed something impossible. Their bodies were intact, but space around them showed compression, like an imprint left behind after something large steps away. Except nothing had stepped away. It had settled. Experts spoke in quiet rooms. They avoided words like entity and presence. They used terms like columnar anomaly and atmospheric convergence. But none of those explained why the affected individuals all shared the same posture. The posture of a child holding an umbrella. The original photograph was finally understood. Not as a warning, not as evidence, but as instruction. Elliot Merrow had not been taken. He had been shown how to make room. When enough people learned the posture, the stillness became stable. Storms stopped behaving like storms. They behaved like structures, invisible towers of pressure standing quietly in populated areas. Cities adapted. People learned routes around places where time felt thicker, where sound dampened, where standing too long felt correct. Children began drawing tall shapes in rain. Parents told them not to stare upward, not to stop moving. But children noticed something adults had forgotten. Stillness feels safe. The final report from the now-defunct research division ended with a single conclusion. The phenomenon does not invade. It occupies space made available. It has always been here. We simply learned how to stop interrupting it. There are no longer photographs of Elliot Merrow, no images of the boy with the umbrella, because the image is no longer necessary. The lesson has been learned. If you feel the urge to stop while watching this, if you notice your posture adjusting, if the room feels quieter than it should, do not panic, do not look up, and whatever you do, do not stand still for too long. Somewhere, a storm is waiting, and it has learned patience. This story exists in the space history of voids, the moments that were recorded but never explained. Welcome to Forgotten Remains, where the past doesn't chase you. It waits,